Get 6 months of local news for just $2. You get unlimited access to the news and information you need to stay connected to your community. Visit inforum.com/subscribe to get 6 months of local news for just $2.
You're listening to Plain Talk, the voice of North Dakota politics. I'm your host, Rob Port. If I sound distracted, it's because I've been busy covering this story all morning. I'm joined by my co-host, Chad Hoeven.
He's right of center, I'm left of center, both sides of the political spectrum.
I think it's cathartic. I think it's a necessary and proper debate. I'm glad we're having it.
And honestly, we have to do better.
Okay, I don't know why I'm getting blamed for this, right? Welcome to Plain Talk, where we're going to be talking a little bit about what voters should care about and what they do care about. A simple reality of getting elected in a system like ours is that you don't get to govern if you don't get the votes. You have to win elections to govern. That's just the way it is. Is it the best system? No, it's got a lot of flaws. Is it better than the alternative? Yeah, because I can't think of a better way. It's not great. Although I heard somebody had a variation on that. I was watching something and, somebody was like, they made this, it's like, something about like life and being at work and then both being better than the alternative. Like work's not fun, but it's better than the alternative. Anyway, I don't know where I'm going with that. There's a lot going on in the world and voters are voting in ways that sometimes don't make a lot of sense to me. And there's a reshuffling going on. A lot of the old coalitions that maybe a lot of us were familiar with growing up are not what they once were. Organized labor, not the reliable vote for Democrats that it once was. Even with certain minority groups, things like skin color, people are voting. It's a little weird right now. But one thing is definitely issues, like definitely what's motivating voters to bring them to the polls. And it's interesting because sometimes what motivates voters are not things that I don't think are important, but if they're important to voters, it kind of creates its own reality, right? Like that's the reality that we have to live with, that those are the voters we want. Anyway, that's a very confusing introduction, but I did write a column about this not long ago, and House Minority Leader Zach Ista, representative Democrat from Grand Forks, read it and wanted to come on. He had some thoughts about it. And he was going to come on with Chad Hoeven, but Chad's not here again today. So we have Kyler Cullum. He is a columnist and podcaster for the Dakotan. You can find his work at mydakotan.com. He is filling in for Chad today. Zach, how you doing? Do we want to spend a little time ragging on Chad before?
I listed as one of my hobbies on my resume, but I'll spare him today. I understand Chad's at a funeral for one of the absolute best statesmen that North Dakota's had, Senator Larry Robinson, who served out of the Valley City area. We lost him last week. It's a big loss for the Democratic family in North Dakota, but also for the state. Right? You talk about a different era of politics, and I think he embodied that. You haven't seen a crossword spoken about him either before or after his passing. He was really one of the best, and hopefully we can get back to the type of politics that Senator Robinson practiced. So we send our sympathy to his family for sure.
I was kicking around writing a column that about Senator Robinson. My headline was going to be that it was proof that once upon a time Democrats could win elections in Valley City, and he did. He was a gentleman. He was in office, at the early part of my writing career, and was just a real gentleman. Was very nice. At a time too when I was just some punk blogger. And he didn't have to, spend any time talking to me. Probably could have safely ignored me, and he didn't. He was a good person and a gentleman, and you're right, a real loss for the state. Talking about
politician from a bygone era for sure, and it's unfortunate to see him gone.
For sure. Now talking a little bit about the topic, and I completely hashed setting the topic up, but essentially Democrats are trying to find the issue that engages with voters and that can get them to the critical mass of those voters, right? Because each party has a base that's just going to vote for them, hell or high water. And so each election cycle is about adding to that base enough to win the election, whether it's the presidency or a majority in Congress or a majority in the state legislature, what have you. And Democrats are really struggling to find that issue. And sometimes I look at your party, Zach, and I see you guys talking about things that just aren't that important to voters, regardless of whether or not they should be important to voters. It's just not where the voters at. And you obviously have a response to that.
I do, Rob. Let me start with where I think we agree. And you've absolutely identified job duty number one of any elected leader in North Dakota or anywhere in the country, and that's to make everyday life a little bit easier for the everyday citizen. And I think as we sit here in fall of 2025, the number one way to do that is bring down this cost of living. People are just absolutely getting hammered, whether it's with rents and mortgages or groceries or utilities, you name it. That's the number one, pocketbook issue that speaks to voters. And you're right to call that out. Where I do have some disagreement with you is I think that's exactly what Democrats here in North Dakota and nationwide are talking about. We just had the Labor Day holiday, and our friend Senator Boucher of Fargo went to the Union Hall down there, and he gave an address to some union workers, and he wasn't there talking about how awful Trump is or some scandal in the news. He was saying, we're a state that can and should afford to pay for school lunches for every student in this state, right? It was, I gave a quote in a press release our state party put out for Labor Day, and I said, all North Dakotans want is for everyday life to be a little more affordable. Look back at the 2024 election cycle. Katrina Christensen, who ran as the Democrat for U.S. Senate, she literally hooked a video camera onto her shopping cart at the grocery store and talked about how that's the most important issue. So I think here in North Dakota, absolutely, that's what we are talking about. It's also what we do in the legislature. I looked, my colleagues and I introduced nearly 40 bills that touched on the economy just last session, but we see this nationwide too. There's not a whole lot of elections in an odd year like this one, but there's governor races in New Jersey and Virginia, and the candidates there, Mikey Sherrill and Abigail Spanberger, the Democrats, they're talking about the rising cost of healthcare, the rising cost of groceries, the rising cost of electricity. So I think it's a message that is carrying through. I actually noticed this Sunday, it was kickoff for the NFL this Sunday, and there's a state senator running for office in Michigan by the name of Mallory McMorrin. I'm always partial to state legislators who aspire to higher office. And she had this great ad that said, you've made it all the way to Sunday. You've worked hard. You just want to enjoy football. But now you can't even do that without breaking the bank. And she talked about the $20 bag of chicken wings, the $5, $6 bag of Doritos, the $15 six-pack of beer. And she connected that not just to the failed, policies out of Washington, but also just this failure of corporations to be attuned to what people want. She talked about how the Red Zone channel, right, the one you can watch all the games and see all the scores, they added commercials for the first time. That's just an annoyance for viewers. And if you want to find your game, you might have to have a dozen different streaming services you subscribe to. So it's just kicking us when we're down at every turn. I think that is a message that both Democrats are talking about and should be talking about. And you're only going to hear more of it as we head to the elections in 2026.
No, that's a great point you make there, Zach. And one thing I want to kind of follow up with then is how do we start changing the just general public perception in the state of you guys getting that message out there like that then?
You're right. That's the challenge. I think a problem for Democrats in North Dakota and across the country is not what our message is. We haven't been great at getting it out in this modern environment. Every paid TV commercial you see or mailer that gets sent to house, it's going to be talking about those issues. But how do we, capture the public's attention in an era of social media and TikTok and YouTube? We got to come on shows like this one with you and Rob. Nationally, people are going on the podcast of Joe Rogan and those types. So we got to get through that media atmosphere. And it's sometimes uncomfortable for us, but we also got to make sure voters know who to blame if they're mad. Because right now, I think voters should care a lot less about what the message is from the Democratic Party that's out of power, and they should care a whole lot more about what the Republican Party that is in power is doing or failing to do, because that's what really matters on a day-to-day basis. I mean, if you're in North Dakota, you're living under a Republican president, your lone representative in Congress is a Republican, your 2 U.S. senators are Republican, Republicans hold the majority in the U.S. House and U.S. Senate, your governors are Republican, all your elected statewide officials are Republican, and Republicans have a supermajority in the state House and Senate. So if you're mad about any policy or any failure to enact a policy or any policy that hasn't gone away quickly enough, there's only one party that you should be mad at, and that's Republicans. We got to do a little bit better job of explaining that to voters too.
Well, I mean, I think you're right. Although I'm struggling a little bit. Is the problem that the message isn't getting out, or is the problem the message? And I agree with you. I saw that ad from the Michigan Democrat. I'm forgetting her name now, but it was good. I mean, that was pretty good. But like Katrina Christensen, hooking a camera on her grocery cart. I don't know how much she got. 33% of the vote last year. That clearly didn't resonate that much, or didn't resonate enough to overcome Senator Cramer's advantages or the voter loyalty to him. And I sometimes, so for instance, one big thing I know that the Democrats have been pushing so far this year, and I kind of consider myself almost a gettable voter in a way. Like I've been trying, because I am very disillusioned with Republicans in the Trump era, as I think I have made clear in my public writings on this subject. To the point
Rob
where
Port's swing voter. This is the headline from today's podcast.
what a time to be alive. I was annoyed to the point where I voted for Kamala Harris. I don't like Kamala Harris. I don't think she would have been a very good president. But I was so sickened by Donald Trump, I voted for her just because I didn't want another 4 years of the guy. And obviously that didn't work out for us. But I feel like I'm somebody who's gettable. Like I'm somebody maybe representative of a type of voter who is conservative, but is disillusioned with Republicans, and is maybe, if Democrats talk about the right issues, gettable. I went to the People's Town Hall that was put on by Trygve Hammer, Democratic MPL here in Minot, thinking that maybe I was going to hear some things about that. And I didn't. It just felt like we're talking about the same old stuff in the same old ways. And I think there's a lot. I find myself getting very annoyed with Democrats because I feel like a lot of times it's very patronizing. I think a lot of times it's very lectury. And a lot of times too, we're very focused on issues that just, I don't think are that important. Cultural issues and Republicans too. We're focused on just dumb issues that matter to but because we all get whipped up about them by podcasters and influencers and cable news hosts. But I feel like Democrats kind of do the same thing. And on a lot of those cultural issues, they just end up on the wrong side. And it's not my place to tell Democrats how to overcome those things. But we mentioned it on the podcast a while ago where Mark Maron, who I think is a great podcaster, wonderful actor and comedian. I really enjoy him. But he made a crack in a recent stand-up special about how progressives had annoyed Americans into fascism. And I mean, it's a joke and it's hyperbole and it's over the top, but I felt like there's just a grain of truth in that, to where I feel like they have to come down out of the academic clouds. You have to come off the campus and start meeting North Dakota voters and American voters where they are. I just don't see that that's happening yet.
What frustrates me about that analysis, Rob, is you called it out yourself. You're one of these gettable voters. And if it wasn't what Democrats were saying about economics, you have a different view of how the government should work with economics. You voted for a Democrat in the last presidential race because messages about how bad Donald Trump was resonated with you. So I think there's a bit of a market for that. As I sometimes get frustrated, I feel like it's only Democrats that are supposed to control their message. Well, if we're putting out relatively boring messages about how great Social Security is and how important healthcare is, bloggers aren't writing columns about that. Podcasters aren't covering that. It doesn't get clicks. It doesn't get eyeballs. That's a challenge. We got to work on that. But the least message disciplined person in America is Donald Trump. He doesn't talk about the price of groceries. He photoshops himself into AI, movie posters from the 70s.
But he does talk about it, though. I mean, he does talk about it. He did. He talked.
He did. Well, here's what he said about groceries. He said, on day 1, we're going to bring prices down. It's day 233. Prices are only going up.
Oh, a lot of it's argle-bargle. I'm not, but he does talk about it.
I disagree. He does not at all focus on the things that matter to the American people. He cares about renaming the Department of War. He has spent more time talking about a made-up controversy about how one particular store is selling its blue jeans and a made-up controversy about how one particular restaurant changed its logo than he ever does talking about how to make it so folks can afford new blue jeans or afford to go out to eat. I mean,
what if we're in a moment of time where that's the stuff that voters care about? That's what scares me a little bit.
I mean, it may be that some of the Donald Trump dead enders, that's what really works for them. But sometimes you have to practice the politics that you aspire to, not the politics of the moment. So, Democrats can't back away from all of these important issues. Like maybe it's a little bit on the nose. I'm literally sitting at my kitchen table as we talk, but this is where we have to focus on 2026. I mean, that's sort of stage two. Stage one is making sure voters know who it is that is not addressing these concerns, both in action and in how they talk about it. We got to do a better job of that as Democrats, and then we got to be here with solutions on the back end. Because I was thinking about, it's been a minute since Democrats have held much power in the state of North Dakota, but if we had been in power these last 20 years, I promise you the minimum wage wouldn't be less than it costs to DoorDash in a Big Mac, right? I promise you wouldn't have to have families who choose between a paycheck and staying home with a sick loved one because we would have enacted paid family leave. And I promise nobody would have paid what you've called the back to school tax, that $100 or $200 you drop in your kid's school lunch account, because we would have adopted free school meals for everybody. So there is a real difference. We'll keep talking about it. Hopefully you and others in the media help take notice, I guess, when we do talk about it. But it's a real big challenge. We got to resist this sort of one weird trick thinking too, that just having one message is going to change things. We've got a long way back to rebuild some trust with voters in North Dakota and across the country.
So you mentioned 2026 as kind of being that stage two, and obviously nationally a successful 2026 would be taking back the Senate and or the House. But for you guys locally, what would a successful 2026 look like?
Look, I think locally a successful 26 looks like fielding strong candidates for some of those statewide offices. We're going to have a strong candidate to hold Representative Fedorchak accountable for a lot of her votes in Congress, particularly the one big, beautiful bill that's cutting healthcare, cutting food assistance for people. And we're going to have to field some really strong legislative candidates, particularly in districts where we have a real opportunity to pick up some seats. Grand Forks, Fargo, tribal communities across the state. And I think what's really important is, look, the numbers, they're tough for us. We're not going to necessarily win a lot of seats in rural North Dakota here in the next year, but we have to show up in those communities, let them know that there are Democrats in North Dakota. They don't all just live in downtown Fargo. They're in rural parts of the state as well. Sometimes we get a little too down on ourselves. It's not a great moment in the history of the North Dakota Democratic MPL party, but just last election, over 120,000 people voted for a Democrat for U.S. Senate. That's about 1 in 3 North Dakotans are willing to go into the ballot box and punch the ticket for a Democrat. So we're not alone out there. We got to make sure people know that. And then we got to, like you said, Kyler, we got to make sure we're telling them, here's what we would do if you give us a few more votes in the North Dakota House and North Dakota Senate.
It's, yeah, I think to get there, because again, we're dealing a lot in cliches here. I mean, kitchen table issues. I hear that everybody talks about that every cycle. And they're nice ideas, and we agree on things like school lunches that we could get done. I think it's hard. I think it's hard for voters to trust the Democrats are going to stay focused on those issues, particularly. And again, I suppose we're talking about the, kind of the albatross around the neck that the national party or the perception of the national party is around the necks of local Democrats. But I'm just trying to struggle with ways in which, and I'm saying this, like, not that I'm super excited about watching liberals win elections. I would like to see Republicans have to work a little harder for it. I would like to see North Dakota's Republicans be a little scared of losing an election now and then, so that they govern better and maybe forego some of their more extreme impulses. I think that would lead for a healthier state overall. But I look at, the focus on some issues that, I don't know. It feels like to me like it doesn't matter. I'm really struggling here because I'm trying to be fair. Like, I understand I'm putting you in a bad position, and this is, it's really kind of a philosophical thing, but I don't know how Democrats overcome brand that they've created for themselves, or at least
Well,
national.
well, look, I think a challenge is that somewhere along the way a vacuum was created wherein we let the Republicans tell everybody what the Democrats' message is, and that message has no resemblance to what the actual Democrats' message
But
is.
let's be fair. If you work in the energy industry in North Dakota, I think you really struggle to see Barack Obama, the Biden-Harris, or excuse me, the Biden-Harris administration, the Obama-Biden administration as your friend.
I think if you're an oil lobbyist, you might struggle to find the friendships in those
but it's comments
administrations.
like that. You don't think that the average oil worker is afraid of losing their jobs?
No, I don't think they're afraid of losing their jobs because they lived through the Biden administration. They lived through the Obama administration, and it was a period of boom for North Dakota's oil industry. I think this is the fear mongering that the Republican Party puts out.
I mean, listen to the things they said. Barack Obama said on the record he wanted to put the coal industry out of business.
And well, then I guess he failed at that route. The coal industry is thriving here in North Dakota.
But is
And,
that
and
the
look
sort
at
of
North
thing
Dakota
that's
Democrats. We're not going to the Capitol in Bismarck and demanding that we put the lock on the door of all the coal plants in North Dakota. We're fighting for a true all of the above strategy. If any party would really believe that rhetoric, we'd really hit the ground running with energy independence in North America.
I understand that you think that those perceptions are unfair. And in some cases, I'm sure they've absolutely been exaggerated by Republicans. I think there is some truth to them, though. And whether you like it or not, isn't that the perception you have to overcome?
Well, look, there's a saying that perception is reality. And I guess that is a challenge for Democrats to overcome. But I think this perception is vastly overstated, right? No Democrat is bringing bills to say what books you must read or must check out of the library. These culture war issues are completely driven by Republicans who see an electoral opportunity here. They know they can't run on their economic message because their solution to every problem is more tax cuts for billionaires. Voters don't agree with that, so they don't want to talk about it. So here's your next big culture war issue we're going to divide this country with. Democrats have been flat-footed on that, no doubt about it, especially at the national level. We got to be ready to respond. But I think to ignore that this is a Republican electoral strategy does miss part of the big picture.
And you make a good point with that, but even still, looking at just, again, that national perception is so entrenched in this local area. Like, even for better, for right or for wrong, even if maybe those oil workers we were talking about earlier shouldn't maybe be worried about losing a position under a Democratic administration, they still are. So it's just, how are you guys going to, again, it goes back to that perception thing. How are you guys going to make sure that they really understand that, hey, if this administration does flip, your jobs are still secure?
It's like I said at the beginning, we have to go out to Williston and other parts of the Bakken and talk to these people, right? Well, they are exactly the type of people we say we are fighting for. We want them to be able to have a lower grocery bill when they go buy food for their family. We want them to have cheaper rents and mortgages. You're right. Number one, though, we have to convince them we're not coming to take your job away. I'm not coming to take your job away. There's absolutely no doubt that North Dakota base load fossil fuel-based energy is an important part of the future here in North Dakota, and certainly an important part of the immediate needs across the country, right? We absolutely should invest in things like wind and solar and all these other emerging technologies. But, I think there's a huge opportunity for Democrats to be the party that says all of the above and mean it, right? We can support these traditional energy economies. We can support those workers, not only by making sure we're not coming for their jobs, but making sure that when they do take home a nice paycheck, it goes as far as they want it to, so they can achieve that version of the American dream they have for themselves. It's going to take a while to rebuild that trust, right? The branding is powerful. We talked about the great Senator Larry Robinson at the beginning. I'm pretty sure Larry Robinson could not change a single position he holds and go on the ballot in Valley City. If he had a D behind his name, he'd lose. If he had an R, he'd win. And that is a challenge. That's a challenge. Republicans in different states probably have that challenge in reverse. You mentioned it earlier, Rob. I think one of my Pollyanna hills I'll always die in is that every government is going to be better if that minority party has 30 or 40% representation in it, because you're just going to be forced to make better decisions. There's going to be more voices at the table. Compromise isn't a dirty word, but we also have to show people that we have some fight in us too.
Well, that's a capitalist, right? Market forces, competition works. If you're the only restaurant in town, maybe you're not going to have the best prices, the best service, but if one opens up down the block, you're going to step your game up a little bit. And I think that's true in politics too. I think so much of you say, I'm not in Bismarck trying to take the oil industry away or something. But I think, if you're the average voter, you're probably paying a lot more attention to pop culture and celebrities and things and national politicians on cable news. And that's what's coloring the lens through which you're seeing both parties, really. I mean, maybe you're an MSNBC viewer, whatever. That's how we're looking at these things. And so, when you hear, I think one mistake that Democrats have made is being far too dependent on celebrity. I don't think, we saw Kamala Harris coming down the end, and she had all these celebrities, endorsing her and everything. I think right now that hurts more than it helps. Particularly.
Well, Rob, I would challenge you to square that with the fact that our current president hosted a reality TV show called The Celebrity Apprentice, right? I just sort of kind of reject that our problem is Taylor Swift likes Democrats.
Right. But the problem is those celebrities, it's different. And it's different. Where we're talking about somebody like George Clooney versus Kid Rock. These are two very different people.
One's an honest to God celebrity. The other has been washed up for years. I mean, there is a difference.
Our celebrities are better than your celebrities. And I don't like any of it. I really wish we could just keep the celebrities out of it. Like it or not, when a North Dakota voter is thinking about a Democrat, they're lumping you in with things that Leonardo DiCaprio may have said about the coal industry. I just think that's it. Like, you're tangled up in that, whether you want to be or not. That's the sort of perception net that you're stuck in. And I think that's where you got to get out of. You got to say, like, listen, I don't care what George Clooney or whatever. This is what Zach Istas says, or this is what Trygve Hammer says, or what have you. This is who we are. But I don't know how you disentangle yourselves in the eyes of the voters.
Or even to a little bit of a wider net too, not just to the celebrity aspect of it, but to people like Zoran Mamdani over in New York City, where a lot of people get some of those negative perceptions and then tie them back into you guys as well.
Well, the fact is, what might work on let's start with this. If I was running in a Democratic primary in Brooklyn, I would lose. I would be far too conservative for the voters of Brooklyn.
I always joke that North Dakota Democrats in other states almost Republicans in a moderate. Right. I mean,
that's true. But to go back to the original point, one of the reasons a guy like that's running for mayor in New York sort of caught fire is he's talking about the high cost of rent in New York. He's talking about the high cost of groceries in a city like that. We could disagree on his solutions. I don't think we ought to own, state-run grocery stores. But, our last legislative session, supermajority Republicans, we invested $1 million in rural grocery support. That's an area where a very conservative Republican, Senator Myrdal, and a Democrat in good standing, Carla Hansen, came together and said, let's provide rural North Dakota with better access to fresh, healthy food. So we can quibble on what the policy solutions are, but I think he is a good example of having his finger on the pulse of what it is that's on voters' minds. So, we try to be as big of a tent as we can. I think sometimes Democrats pay a price for our most extreme members, our most vocal members, in a way that somehow the Donald Trump contingent doesn't, right? We could go blow for blow with some extreme Republican voices in Washington and the national scene. Voters don't care about that.
If you look at the body of my work, I am not ignoring the extreme Republicans at all. I focus on them all the time. They drive me crazy. But on the flip side, I don't know. North Dakota are more tolerant of that sort of than they are of the other sort, and I think it really hurts you guys. But we are heading into a new election cycle. Any hints on who's going to be running for? Are we going to see Katrina and Trygve on the ballot again for Congress, or what? Any ideas on who's going to run for what?
I have played political pundit and horse race enough today. I don't have any news for you on who's going to be on the Democratic ballot. But to go back to where we started, I can tell you what our message is going to be. It's how do we bring down the cost of living for North Dakota, right? We opened the Grand Forks Herald this morning, got 2 separate articles about how food pantries are struggling to fill their shelves, how food insecurity is going up. We heard testimony in the legislature last week about 100. Listen to what I think I wrote it down. 20,000 North Dakotans applied for emergency rent assistance. That's what we're going to be talking about on the election cycle. I know what voters care about. Rob, you've absolutely framed the challenges we have in getting that message through to people. Disassociating ourselves from some misperceptions. But that's what we're going to be talking about between now and November of 2026, and beyond that, because it's going to be the types of bills we introduce in the legislature.
And by the way, another thing, a column, if you had read, and it went up just shortly before we did the interview, so you haven't seen it yet, but the Trump administration, it's been 51 days since our governor declared an emergency for the Enderlin tornadoes that killed, 3 people, significant amounts of damage. Our delegation just sent a letter saying that our state emergency funds are empty. We don't have enough. We need the federal government to engage. It's juxtaposed with an Associated Press report that delays in responding to those things take forever. And I'm wondering, we're kind of living in a place where Donald Trump's even playing politics with something as fundamental. Whether you like it or not, states from California to North Dakota are dependent on the federal government when it comes to emergency relief, and the president's been playing politics with it. I don't know if that's what's happening with the North Dakota relief, but it ain't showing up. In years, according to the Associated Press analysis, in years past, it would take an average of 2 weeks for one of those for a presidential administration to act on it. We're at 51 days, and overall, the Trump administration's average is at about a month. And to me, that speaks to inefficiency. And then some of the comments he's made, where he's not going to give California emergency release until they implement voter ID laws. I like voter ID laws, but that's up to the people of California. And their emergency relief shouldn't hinge on that. So that's another thing that I think is worth pounding on, where we're politicizing things that should not be politicized.
Look, it's absolutely shameful. You have a lot of Republican politicians failing a lot of Republican voters. I take the back roads home from Bismarck, and I drove through Page and Hunter and the Arthur area. I saw the damage that windstorm did, and I can also look at an electoral map. I know there's a whole lot of Republican voters in that region. They expect Julie Fedorchak and John Hoeven and Kevin Cramer to deliver, but those guys are just rubber stamps for Trump. Do they know there's ways to influence a president beyond kissing his ass all the time? Like, withhold votes. Don't rubber stamp his policies until he authorizes disaster relief for North Dakota. It's just an absolute failure of any influence they might have.
Well, I don't know. I did think it was funny, because in my column I picked up on something where Hoeven sent out randomly that Hoeven, who does not wade into controversy, the man is allergic to controversy, right? You read his press releases, and you go down his social media, it's a litany of important but not very sexy policy announcements. And then all of a sudden he's got this one praising Donald Trump for his deploying the National Guard in Washington, D.C. as this wonderful thing. And it was so out of character for him. I was scratching my head, like, what is he up to? He must want something for Trump. And a week later, along comes this thing, we haven't gotten our federal. Are those two things linked? Maybe they're not. I'm not inside John Hoeven's head. I don't know. But you're right. Flattering this president is how you get things from him. And maybe that's what they're doing. And what a terrible state of affairs that is. So anyway,
it's a very narrow margin in the U.S. Senate. Their votes, individual votes, have a whole lot of power. Like, you had a column, we can stop playing games with clearly qualified folks like Nick Chase to be U.S. attorney in North Dakota, but they can also use their leverage of their vote on some Trump administration priorities and say, we're not going to play ball until those disaster funds come and help our farmers here in North Dakota.
Regardless if you're a Republican or Democrat in Congress, there is a point at which the Congress just needs to stand up to the executive branch. Much of this, the same dynamic exists in North Dakota, where sometimes the legislature just has to stick up for the legislature, and the executive branch has to stick up for the executive branch. And it shouldn't matter what party you're in. You're protecting the institutions. But everybody hates the institutions now. Nobody trusts them. Everybody hates them. That's where we're at. So, all right, we're going to end it there. Zach, thank you so much for your time.
Good. Kylie, good to be on with you. And I hope in the after action report you do rib Chad a little bit, even though he's gone for good reasons today.
Thanks, Zach. It was a pleasure.
Hey, Plain Talk listeners, have something to say? Call or text Plain Talk with your questions, comments, or headlines you want us to cover.
Just dial 701-587-3141. Leave us your message or shoot us a text with your name and location, and you could be featured on an upcoming show.
Hi, my name is Ashley, and I am in Jamestown.
Hey, Rob and Chad. My name's Tony. I live in Grand Forks.
That's 701-587-3141.
Call us, text us, vent, praise.
We want you in the conversation. Thanks for being part of the show.
Now let's get back to today's episode.
Welcome back. Just finished up with Representative Ista, who's always fun to talk to. He's a little defensive. And understandably so, because I think it's a tough thing to be in, because it's like I sometimes wondered if he was listening to what I was saying. Is he asking us to just stop being Democrats?
Mm-hmm.
And maybe that's some wish casting on my part, where I wish I had people who were traditionally conservative and not in the Trump movement that I could vote for. And that's probably just not going to be liberal Democrats ever. And maybe that's just a problem that's particular to me. But I do think the branding issues, his sort of pushback on, it's wrong that the oil workers feel that Democrats are going to cost them their job. Well, I don't know that that's a good rebuttal. Like, if you're an oil worker and you look at some of the things that Obama administration officials or Biden administration officials said about oil and gas and concluded that they might be a risk, or at least more of a risk to your livelihood than Republicans would be, having a Democrat just say, well, you're just wrong about that, is not a good rebuttal to them. If they feel that way and they work in the industry, like, you're going to have to address that.
Yeah, because guess what? Perception becomes reality at a certain point. And you can argue that, they should or shouldn't believe this as they do, but if they believe it, that's where you have to stand, and that's where you have to figure out how to pivot from there.
Yeah. So I think they're in a tough place. And I mean, they have it, and that's not news. North Dakota Democratic MPO candidates in a tough place. News at 11.
Yeah, last 15 years.
Right. Yeah. I mean, really 30. I mean, it's been a while.
Exactly.
I think the only person not named the last Democrat to not named Heidi Heitkamp to win a statewide election was Earl Pomeroy in 2000.
Yeah.
17 years ago now.
It's crazy, because then he lost to, it was Rick Berg in 2010 with the whole Tea Party movement. Yep. And ever since then, it's just been completely.
Well, trust me, Kyler, I remember. I was there. I was there. So yeah, it's a really interesting debate, and it's just, Democrat, they just got to find that issue. And I do think issues like, for instance, the disaster relief that I mentioned, at the end, I think that's a really interesting issue. I had not realized that we had such a delay. I mean, normally those disaster declarations are just routine.
Yeah,
routine. A flood happens, a storm happens. The governor does a disaster declaration and requests federal intervention. The feds release some money. Everyone goes on with their lives. Is that the best way to handle that? I think you can make some arguments. Maybe states shouldn't be so reliant on the federal government, some of those things. I'm willing to have that debate. But the way things are right now, it doesn't matter if you're North Dakota or California or Texas or whatever. Disaster happens. You put out a declaration and the federal government assists. And in the past, whether it's under President Biden or President Obama or President Bush or President Clinton or any of them, it hasn't been politicized and it hasn't been controversial. But under Donald Trump, not only is it taking a long time, according to the Associated Press, I mean, it's taking significantly longer than it did under previous administrations. But also
you're going from something that typically takes at the absolute most maybe a week or two to now we're sitting on almost 2 months post the time of the emergency.
This is what the Associated Press said about it. They said, on average, it took less than 2 weeks for a governor's request for a major disaster declaration to be granted by presidents in the 1990s and early 2000s. That rose to about 3 weeks during the past decade under presidents from both major parties. It's taking more than a month on average so far during President Donald Trump's current term. And the request for the Enderlin, which those storms killed, was it 3 people? Enderlin, Spiritwood. We're at 51 days and count. Now, I had an error in my column when I first published. I had 81 days because I calculated stupidly from the day of the storm and not the day of Governor Armstrong's
Declaration.
So it was 51 days. Even so, well above the norm.
Yeah.
And there's a point at which you have to ask, is it because Trump expects people, he's such a transactional president, do we have to give him something in order for him to do his job? Do we have to praise him in some way?
And even if that is the case in this instance, I don't think I've seen a reason for our contingency or our delegation in Washington to have any reason for him to lash against them and try to deny them anything.
No,
I mean,
but I do think he's transactional, and I think it's a situation.
I agree with that.
Where he kind of expects, if you want to get something from him, he expects something in return, and that's not public service.
Yeah, it's really disappointing to see that, especially in these disaster situations where it's something that shouldn't be about politics. And even for something like this to take 2 weeks feels like it's a long time, let alone now we're almost on 2 months. And the question is just why at this point?
It's the letter that the delegation sent, because Governor Armstrong made for the most recent storms, he made a disaster declaration on September 2nd. So we have 2 pending.
Sure.
So September 2nd, and then the previous one was June 21st. And so to sort of following up on those disaster declarations, the delegation sent out a letter. And this is what they wrote. They said, while North Dakotans are just by way of illustrating how important this is.
Yeah.
So while North Dakotans are extremely resilient, the August 7th to 8th severe storm system, coupled with the previous June 20th to 21st derecho event. Am I pronouncing that right? Is it derecho?
Derecho? Derecho? Something like that, yeah.
I never pronounce. I always read everything and I never listen to anything, so I don't pronounce things right sometimes. Anyway, they said the June 20 to 21st derecho event, that's what I'm going with, has compounded the need for federal recovery assistance in areas of our state. The size, scope, and combination of the June and August storms would entirely deplete any available state and local emergency funds, leaving nothing available for future disasters or emergency response operations during the 2025-2027 biennium. So essentially they're saying these 2 events drained the money out of our emergency. Now, North Dakota has other reserves we could tap into if need be.
For sure.
But we're kind of looking at a situation where those funds are depleted. The legislature's not in session again until January of 2027. So, over a year until the legislature can get back in session and really do some stuff, because the federal government's doing what? What's the holdup? And I think if you're a Trump voter in North Dakota, I mean, those Enderlin, Spiritwood, those are rural areas, a lot of Trump voters out there. You got to be asking, is your president doing the job you elected him to do right now?
Yeah, that's a heavily conservative area in this state. And to see this complete lack of accountability for them, I guess I can't speak, I'm not there, but I would feel like it should feel like a slap in the face to them.
Yeah. So that's tough stuff. And then even the, if you could argue that, I don't know. I don't know where I was going with that. I think it's just, it's very, very frustrating to watch. The politicization. I mean, even setting aside the delays for the president of the United States to say, while LA is burning from wildfires, to say, hey, California, maybe if you change your laws, you'll get your disaster funding. Those are the games we want to play at the national level. So if we have a Democratic president one day and the Democratic president say, hey, North Dakota, get rid of your voter ID law, and then we'll help you with flooding.
And see, that's the thing. That's where this could turn into, because you're setting a precedent. And like in your one article you put out, you're seeing so much of this back and forth between the parties, where just because this side did it, that gives us the credit or the precedent to do it now, doesn't mean that's what should be happening. But it just feels like that's what it's turning into.
I don't think there's a lot of Trump supporters right now who are contemplating what it means, like all this massive expansion of executive authority, deviation from the norms of sort of the way presidents comport themselves and make decisions. And if the next president is a Democrat, are they going to do the same things? Only do them in ways that Republicans don't. I mean, you really kind of have to divorce it from, even if you really like Trump, and you really hate Democrats, and you like it when he's sticking it to Democrats and everything. One of the reasons why we support, like we write the laws down and we have the Constitution and we put these political leaders in boxes, we put boxes around the power that they can wield, is that they don't abuse it. And you can't support tearing down those boxes because the person in the box in the moment happens to be somebody you like.
Mhm. And you've seen the expansion of that box incrementally over the last 100, if not, 115 years since the turn of the 19th or the 20th century. And it's grown, slightly over time, but now in the last really 40 years, we've seen it expand even further. And it's taken on a whole different life and role of its own, where it's, instead of being a triumvirate of power between the executive, judicial, and legislative branches, it's almost a one and then 1A and 1B underneath it, with the executive branch and then the legislative and the judicial branches kind of being an underneath section to it.
Yeah. So it has been a dramatic expansion of executive authority under Donald Trump. And I think Republicans are going to rue the day. I mean, we're going to have Democratic presidents again. We're going to have Democratic majorities in Congress again. Are they going to behave this way? And how are Republicans going to feel? I was even in the column I wrote responding to Senator Hoeven when he was praising, Donald Trump, for deploying the military in Washington, D.C. And as a conservative, as an American, I have some deep reservations about using the military domestically for like law enforcement and stuff. Yeah. Military is not law enforcement. He did it in Washington, D.C., which is a little bit special because it's a federal district.
You can make an argument enough for that one, but
he's talking about Chicago. He's talking about L.A. He's talking about doing it in some of these other places. And I'm thinking how Republicans would have reacted is if in the heights of the oil boom, when, we saw a lot of young male workers come into Western North Dakota. They had a lot of disposable income, and we saw a little bit of a crime wave. Yeah. What if Barack Obama had decided that he was going to send the military into Watford City to restore order or something? Now, I would have opposed that. That wasn't necessary. We dealt with it. We handled it. But what if Barack Obama, who had an interest in sort of, he wasn't a real big fan of the oil industry.
Yeah.
What if he made that move? How would then Governor John Hoeven have reacted? How would other Republicans in North Dakota have reacted to that? Well, they would have opposed it, and they would have been right to.
Yeah.
Why aren't they then opposing what Donald Trump is talking about?
Exactly. Like Hoeven would have ran for a Senate campaign on that back in the day.
Sure.
And now you have it where people are just allowing Trump to just walk over the situation. And it's just becoming, I hate the word hypocritical because it can come off extremely harsh, but it's starting to feel that way at this point.
It's hypocritical. You can be harsh. It is absolutely hypocritical. And because that's what it is. You cannot support it, but only when my people are in power. We have to support the frame of government and the limits on powers and the separation of powers that we want, and then enforce those things regardless of who's in power.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a separate issue for partisan, but it's become downstream from partisan politics, and it's killing us.
It's like they might be separate, but they've become linked at this point.
I wish Chad was here. Are you a baseball fan, Kyler?
I love baseball. I am a disappointed Twins fan, as always.
Another type of Twins fan, I wonder.
I don't, not in the past, 34 years.
That was harsh. That one was harsh. Speaking of the Yankee fan who wishes I wish the Twins every day.
The Yankees and Twins over the last 20 years, which is equated to about a full regular season, the Twins have won 40 games against the Yankees, and they're 120 losses.
Even when the Yankees are bad, we're playing some of the worst baseball I've ever seen. But when we're going to Minneapolis for the weekend, it's going to be good.
No, it's going to be a shelling.
Did you see that? The Philadelphia, I think they're calling her the Philadelphia Karen.
Oh yeah. They're from last weekend, I think.
I have some mixed feelings about it because on one hand, she acted like a jerk.
Yeah,
right. She was being a jerk, and I think that's really unfortunate. The guy. I mean, there's always a little bit of a scrum for those foul balls. The guy got it. He gave it to his kid, and she comes storming over and says, "Give me that ball. That was my ball. You took that away from me.
You took it out of my hands or something."
That was lame. I do worry though about the sort of public reaction to it that we're seeing where it's like, I mean, I'm reading in some of the baseball forums and stuff that I follow. People are like, "Oh, good, destroy her life, make sure everybody knows her." It's like because she acted like an a-hole for a little while at a game. I mean, none of us has ever done that. Has ever, in the moment lost our cool a little bit and said some things we regret or did something you regret. That's never happened to any of us.
And a little, on the flip side of that, this might be a hot take in and of itself a little bit, and I have never got the opportunity to catch a foul ball or a home run ball, but I've always thought it was a little interesting of a sequence to, like, if there's a little kid by you. I mean, obviously, if you're a grown ass man, what's the point here? But if you got a kid by you, it's like it's a forced feeling, or it's an expectation, excuse me, that ball's got to go to the kid. And I understand that it probably should. It just feels like it's a little bit of
it depends on the context. If you catch it and you're kind of off on your own and no other kids went to it, I say keep the ball.
Yeah.
There's another kid that went there, you caught it, celebrate, have a little fun, give the ball to the kid. That's probably the best path. But there is like this expectation now. And I think we're all a little judgy. I think,
like, did she deserve to be made fun of because of how she acted? There's a fair chance. I think so.
Deserve to have her life ruined?
No.
Harassed, threatened, or some of the other things?
And be completely publicly blasted with all of her personal information and her job coming to light? That's the excessive part.
It's disproportionate.
Yeah, completely so in that regard.
And listen, everybody listening to this, if somebody followed you around with a camera all day, probably going to find some things that you've done or said that you regret.
Exactly.
I wonder how many of our nation's problems, our society's problems, Kyler, can be attributed to the fact that we just have too much flipping time on our hands.
Yeah. You're not wrong. We have the ability to, like, these things are at our fingertips. We can do so much with our phones and have so much information there, yet we choose to just compartmentalize it to such a degree where we're able to really expand on anything we want. And so often we take that expansion into such a random or misdirected place.
I think about describing, could you imagine like going back in time to like a 1920s era farmer and telling them, well, I spent the afternoon roasting some rando from Philly who was at a Phillies game, roasting her on Reddit because she didn't, she acted like a jerk about a foul ball, and then wondering like, why do you care?
Yeah.
Why do you care?
Why
do I care about?
Yeah.
I mean, I guess it was entertaining to watch, and she was a jerk, and I guess we're all kind of rubbernecking like that. But really, why do we care?
Yeah, and like there was the secondary follow-up angle where after she got done confronting the dad, she went down a couple rows and started yelling at some other fan. But again, you make the great point. Why do we even care? And this, I know you and Chad talked about the Sydney Sweeney Jeans situation a few weeks back prior to. Like, why are these the things that get people worked up and riled up and caring about when there's a lot bigger, more pressing issues that people should be worried about?
Because it's a lot more fun to talk about Sydney Sweeney than it is Social Security.
Yeah, you're not wrong.
Right? I mean, it is. Like, it's more entertaining and it's easier to talk about because you can kind of take, and it titillates something in us, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, to take a position and then advocate for that position to other people. And then social media has given us all platform for this, where normally it's like you didn't get to do this unless you went down to sat at the corner of the bar down at the local watering hole or argue with your neighbor about it over the back fence in between laps with your lawnmower.
It's come to the point where anybody can say anything and anybody could, in theory, hear it.
When I did talk radio, there was so much pressure to kind of like, well, I got to get callers. Mm-hmm. And I got to get, how am I going to respond? Well, I'll find some story like the Philadelphia Karen, and then you take a hot take, and then you get people calling in, and then that's the business model, right? I'm so glad.
That's your like measure of success in that industry. If you're able to have a constant waiting list of callers lined up, you're doing well.
All right.
And it's unfortunate that it sometimes takes those nonsensical headlines to be the driving force behind it.
I cannot tell you how happy I am to not have to do talk radio anymore.
4 hours a day of just trying to find something to yap about.
I did 3. Sometimes I would do 5. The person I was working for a while wasn't showing up to work a lot, and he did the morning show. I did the early morning show, so I would do a 2-hour, like 6 to 8, and then at like 7:30, I'd get a text saying I need you to do my 3-hour show too. That's 5 hours of talk radio, Kyler. Nobody needs to listen to me for 5. I don't even like listening to myself for 5 hours.
You run out of things to talk about. You've got to recycle content by the end of that 5 hours.
It was terrible. Yeah, I hated it. But yeah, I mean, that's the world. Everything is a talk radio show now.
Exactly. But that's the beauty of podcasting. You're able to specialize it and put it into a better context.
And listen, I fall prey to it too. I find myself like getting invested in some stupid controversy that it impacts me not at all. You know, what happens in the left field bleachers at a random Phillies game in September.
I'm not even a Phillies fan.
Doesn't matter to me. It doesn't touch my life at all.
But hey, there's a Twins link to that. Harrison Bader hit that home run who got traded to the Phillies.
That's a Yankees link too, by the way. I wish he could have hit home runs when he played for us. He was terrible with the bat. Great with the glove, not so good with the bat. I am trying, though. That is something I'm really trying, is to care. This sounds terrible, but to care less about things. That's my new philosophy. Care less.
Yep. Like there's so much, and again, this is a bigger point that we probably don't have time to get all the way into, but there's a difference between caring and trying to make a difference about something. Like you don't need to necessarily care about everything because there's so much that you just can't affect and you can't control. It is completely out of your purview and you're just reacting to it. And again, as reactionary and as in the moment, it seems like it's a necessary thing. In the grand scheme, it's not going to make any difference whatsoever, except maybe being a little cathartic to you.
All right, we're going to end things there. Thank you so much for listening. Remember, you can subscribe to us on all the social media things that we consistently advocate for you not to spend so much time on. What can we tell you? But please engage with our content on there. Plain Talk ND is our handle on TikTok, YouTube, Facebook, X. You can also leave us a voicemail or text message, 701-587-3141. Coming up next week, next on Wednesday, we're going to have Cecily Werman on. She's the executive director of the North Dakota Newspaper Association, talking about, obviously there's no question the newspaper industry is facing challenges, but also there's some bright spots too. So we're going to talk a little bit about that because these, and also, by the way, some surprising polling numbers showing how many strong majorities of North Dakotans saying that a local newspaper is important, that supporting your local newspaper is important. We'll get into all that next week. Stay tuned for that. And Kyler, thank you so much for joining us. You can find his work at mydakotan.com. He does a podcast that does a variety of podcasts and live streams, mostly about Minot stuff, but there were
dabble into some state stuff, especially during the legislative period and the election.
You guys kind of remind me of me, like 24 years ago to the day.
Thank you, Rob. We appreciate that.
Although it's a lot easier for you because I was working with a dial-up modem.
Yeah, no,
and streaming. I had nothing. I had to write my prose in HTML code because I didn't even have. You
had to code it yourself.
Like a WYSIWYG editor to do bolding and italics and links. I had to hard code
everything
back in the early days. So that's me, grumpy old man, saying you kids these days are a lot easier. I had to write my blog posts up hills both ways.
But we do. The technology has made it so accessible that I'm able to step in seamlessly. My co-host, Jonathan Starr, he is a tech whiz. He can hammer all that stuff home, and I get to just be this pretty face that, annoys everybody.
It has enabled a lot of people that we don't need to hear from very much. But Kyler and Jonathan Starr are not too. They're worth tuning into. Thank you so much for listening. We'll talk again. That's it for today on Plain Talk, the voice of North Dakota politics. Plain Talk is a production of Forum Communications Company. Got a question, comment, or suggestion? Leave us a voicemail or send us a text message at 701-587-3141. That's 701-587-3141. If you haven't subscribed to Plain Talk yet, you can find us on YouTube or your favorite podcast platform like Spotify or Apple Podcasts. For those of you who are already hooked, give us a rating or review. and don't forget to share or tell a friend. Special thanks to my co-host Chad Hoeven, and from myself and everyone at Plain Talk, thanks for listening.
Rob Port's swing voter. This is the headline from today's podcast.